We're having a conversation today about differences between, between the left and the right side of the paradigm. As a lot of us become quote unquote conspiracy theorists, we still hold on to these confirmation biases that we've had from our past, or maybe they're honest disagreements that we need to work through. And one of the issues that has just come up, because a lot of us are talking about the Great Reset, as my listeners will know, episode 62 I did with Allison McDowell. And there's become a little bit of a conflict concerning blockchain technology. And it's been happening kind of between if I want to put it this way, between the Allison McDowell camp and the Derek Bros camp. Derek Bros is putting on the Greater Reset activation this week, and he's invited a lot of blockchain enthusiasts. And so there's been quite the raging debate that's happening online right now between those who feel like blockchain can be used as a tool to defeat essentially the centralized banking cartel, and those who feel that blockchain technology is, by its very definition, a tool for the technocracy. And Jason and I I won't say got into it a little bit, but we were kind of describing the differences in our personal philosophies about it. I think I lean towards the Derek Bros camp, and Jason maybe finds himself more in the Allison McDowell camp. And rather than continuing to try to have a stilted communication on social media, we decided that we would just get together on this program and really have a more in-depth conversation about it, and in the hopes that we can continue to refine the differences between the left-right paradigm as we awaken or open our minds to the idea that maybe there is some sort of group or organization or just a billionaire class that has more control over all of us than we may think. We become quote unquote conspiracy theorists, but we're still going to have some of these fundamental differences. So in order to hash these out, I invited Jason on the show, and I just want to welcome him to the program. Thanks for coming on, Jason. How are you doing today?
Hey, Doug. Thanks a bunch. I'm good. I just want to quick clarify, I don't really like the framing of the Derek Bros camp versus Allison McDowell camp, because I think we need to kind of get away from framing these things in terms of teams, like which team are you on, and just get down to actually discussing the actual the merits of the arguments. But anyways, just that's a little qualifier,
Sure.
Because I don't really want to be seen in one camp or another. I'm in camp humanity, and however we get there is we need to have. I'm grateful for you having me on, because I think these discussions need to happen, and that's the problem is people do get set in their camps, and they're not listening to the concerns and the arguments of others. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. I think we can have a really productive conversation here. In preparation for this, I was listening to some of your podcast episodes, and I especially paid attention to the one that you did with John Titus, as you were discussing kind of the overall theories of monetary policy. And I think the one thing that we do agree on, and as people, I sort of wake up into this, again, quote unquote, conspiracy theory paradigm of viewing world events, one of the central issues is monetary policy. And a lot of us have realized that the way central banking works basically creates an artificial scarcity. So I want to take 2 minutes or so to describe basically what you and John were discussing, which is that currently in the current system, money is created out of debt. So when a bank gives you a loan for $10,000, then they create that amount of debt out of thin air. But what they don't create, and this is important for people to understand, they don't create the interest that you've got to pay back for that loan. And once you wrap your mind around this, you realize that if the money supply is created by the creation of debt, but then there's not enough money in the entire money supply to pay back the debt plus the interest, then all of us that are involved in this system, this currency, this controlled centralized currency system, are in a situation where we have to compete with each other, and there have to be losers. Some percentage of the population is not going to be able to pay off the debt plus the interest, because all of us are competing with each other, and those that are winning that competition are, getting more of the money, able to pay back their loans. But for those that don't win that competition, they either are homeless, go out of business, end up with no money, or they have to get another loan. And so it keeps this whole cycle of debt going. As you look into it more, I think the only way you can describe it as debt slavery. And again, this creates essentially an artificial scarcity in the money supply, so that we're all kind of stuck in this situation. Does that sound about right to you, Jason?
Yeah, more or less. I mean, well, more actually, but that's a start of it for sure. I mean, I think we agree. I got like water in my head. I think we agree a lot on that this is a problem. This Federal Reserve System and international banking system that's been with us has been parasitic, and and there is no there. So I come from, my background is I used to show documentaries and media activists around, but a lot of it was more kind of left stuff. But I've always been kind of libertarian, but I'm kind of like a left libertarian because I'm an anti-capitalist libertarian, if that makes sense. And I want to clarify that at some point in the show. But so I'm showing documentaries about ecology, environmental issues, about war, poverty, all the different things that ail us. And I realized that there is literally no solution to these problems within this monetary framework. And so once I understood the monetary system, I began banging my head against the wall, trying to explain to other people that were a little bit more on the liberal side of things that, hey, you know, all these talks about climate or whatever, you can't solve that problem with a monetary system that, whereas the people, a handful of people have the power to create it and extinguish it. It represents a debt to them, to the banks, not to each other. And it has an interest that compounds, that can never be paid back. And you can't solve any of these other problems without solving this problem. And there's a lot of things that need to happen, but that is I would say that's the single greatest challenge that we face in order to solve the problems that we're all concerned about.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. The number one issue in my mind right now, I think if we had a really healthy body politic that was really aware of what was going on, I mean, we can talk about creating a bigger welfare state all day long. We can talk about the fight for $15 an hour and raising the minimum wage all day long. And until we deal with this,
taxes.
Yeah. Exactly. Until we deal with this artificial scarcity of the currency that's imposed upon us by central banking, we're always going to have poverty. It does not matter what else we do. And there are solutions out there. There's multiple different currency options that we could try out. And actually, this is what I'm a proponent of, is we should be trying all of them at once. There's no reason that we have this kind of geographic mentality that within the borders of this nation state, we all have to use this one currency. I think there should be local currencies. There should be industry currencies that are used, basically credit systems within industries. And I would advocate for the use of peer-to-peer blockchain technology as another form of creating currencies, as long as they're competing with each other, because I think then this would eliminate, well, first of all, it would eliminate the scarcity problem, because there would be plenty of currency out there. If people wanted to, needed currency, they could get it. But also, because the currencies would be competing against each other, no one could dominate the market and overinflate themselves, which is what we see now, especially with the US dollar as the world reserve currency. It's capable of inflating itself almost to infinity. And still not lose a heck of a lot of its purchasing power, at least currently. But if we have competing currency systems, then if one currency tries to inflate itself, it's simply going to lose value against the other currencies. I mean, what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts about that? I just bounce back and forth.
There's a lot of layers to that, but
yeah.
That was one of the things, I got involved with complementary currency over 10 years ago, actually. I helped, we tried to create a time bank here in Colorado. And unfortunately, everybody that was involved were just too spread out. So it's kind of one of those things where people, I think, need to be in closer proximity for it to work. But the idea of having other local complementary currencies that can be counter-cyclical to the regular economy. So when the national currency goes down, it can fill in the gaps. As a general principle, I think that's a good idea. But I also think that it's really important as we, obviously things are going to change. Things are changing really, really fast. And there's going to be threats, and there's also opportunities to create new systems. And since we have this opportunity, I think it's really good to not just say, oh, let's just do any and all, any all currencies and just everything's great. I think we need to first really, really understand the problem. And the issue of money is a complex one. It's not just looking, oh, it's a medium of exchange. It's a store of value. It's a tool of social control. There's a lot of different features to a monetary system and how it's designed. And there's also, I think, even beneath that, there's something that's like not tangible about it as well. Bernard Lietaer he was one of the creators of the euro, but he wrote several books, The Future of Money and New Money for a New World, with a friend of mine, Stephen Zarlenga, who passed away, or not Stephen Zarlenga, Stephen Belgium, who passed away a few years ago, but he's written several books about complementary currency. And one of the lines that he had was, money is not value neutral. In other words, depending on how you design the money, it's going to favor certain values over others. And it's just a nature of the beast. Like there is no such thing as a value neutral money. And so the way you design it, whether it's scarce or not, who has the power to create it, whose hands it is, if it's in concentrations in one person's hands, they're going to have a lot of power over others. And it changes our behavior too. Like if we go through the world, and I think this is one of the larger, I don't want to say disagreements, but just different ways of looking at things that maybe we can have conversations and come to some understanding is, I think that there's something flawed in the very in looking at the world through markets and through money and through even measuring. I think that there's an essence about what is valuable, and what gets measured and what doesn't get measured, and there's a lot of value that it's just literally impossible to measure that value. That we do value and that is valuable. Sure. But this idea of looking at everything through numbers and measurement, and that's why, I don't know if you're familiar with David Graeber, but he wrote Debt, the First 5,000 Years. It's a great book. He's an anthropologist. Okay. And so he was just talking about, like, before money, communities. I mean, this works in smaller. We have a challenge because these were smaller communities, and so they could operate a lot differently than we're having to figure out how to deal with in this global sense of resource distribution and everything. But he was talking about Adam Smith and the story of the myth of barter. He's got a whole chapter called The Myth of Barter. So the economists tell us that money was created because these communities were bartering, and you have 5 chickens and I have a cow, and how do we trade that? Well, what he pointed out was there's actually no anthropological evidence of any community ever that existed on barter. That doesn't mean people didn't trade things occasionally, but he said there's no evidence that this ever actually existed, and that this was actually likely a story that it didn't even come originally from Smith. He got it from someone else, and I can't remember the name of the person. But it sets this idea that everybody's always just looking out for one another, and like, I'm not going to give you something unless you give me something. But he was saying that these earlier communities actually existed more like on a gift economy. In other words, like someone needed their barn fixed or whatever, the community would just come out and help them. Like there wasn't any like, oh, tit for tat, like I need to make sure I get my my money for this. And then, maybe if someone was an asshole and didn't help out or whatever, people remember that. But we have a problem now where we're on this larger scale. So how do we deal with that? But there are problems that we need to think about in terms of what that does to humanity when we are just constantly looking at each other and looking at everything through a market, and I think that's one of my biggest concerns that I have about a lot of like the crypto capitalist or the anarcho-capitalist mindset. And by the way, I agree with them on a great deal of things. Like I have a lot of agreement, but I also have some disagreements. And like I said, I think we need to have more of these conversations.
Right. Absolutely. Well, let's, I think we should take a step back and then just talk about like, what is your definition of capitalism? Because that word is so
Perfect.
confused. And I mean, certainly like I have a problem with corporate capitalism, or even, I mean, I look at it as a longer term system of colonization, corporate colonization, or even an extension of the old feudal system, right? I mean, we can talk about that all day, and how vile it is and how much it steals the labor of the people that are participating in it. But then if I use, say, the concept of the free market, which is just a marketplace where people can communicate with each other using nonviolence and consensual behavior, right? I don't have a problem with that. However, it self-organizes as a result. So what is your definition of capitalism, and then what are the problems that you have with it?
I'm very glad you asked that question, because I think this is a big confusion.
Yeah.
I would hold events and I'd be, ragging on capitalism, using the capitalism word, and people have a different understanding of what that actually means. And I remember there was one event, and this guy stood up and he's like, "Well, I'm a capitalist." And I'm like, "Oh, really? Like, so what, tell me about your business or whatever." He's like, "Well, I run a business," and like he had like a hardware business or something. I can't remember. I'm like, "Oh, you're a business person. You're operating within a market. That doesn't necessarily mean you're a capitalism or a capitalist."
Yeah.
So I want to read something from David Graeber's book, Debt: The First 5,000 Years, that actually touches on this, that has been really useful for me to help understand the difference and clarify, what issues that I have with the current setup. So this is from David Graeber. "We're used to assuming that capitalism and markets are the same thing, but as the great French historian Fernand Braudel pointed out, in many ways they could be equally well conceived as opposites. While markets are always ways of exchanging goods through a medium of exchange, historically, ways with those surplus grain to acquire candles and vice versa, in economic shorthand, it would be CMC. So that would, C is commodity, M is money, and C is commodity. So the equation would be C, you have commodity, you use money to get another commodity. So the money is just a mere medium of exchange between the trade of commodities or goods and services. So that's a market. Capitalism is first and foremost the art of using money to get more money. Normally, the easiest way to do this is by establishing some kind of formal or de facto monopoly. For this reason, capitalists, whether merchant princes, financiers, or industrialists, invariably try to ally themselves with the political authorities to limit the freedom of the market so as to make it easier for them to do so. Now, so it's literally the opposite. And capitalists are the people who use their money. They don't create any value or anything. They're what I call the Derek kind of laughed at my talking about the investor class, but it's a real thing. And many of us many people, even if you've got a 401k, you're kind of pulled into that world. And I'm saying that there's something, let me just finish and then we can talk about it. But there's something fundamentally wrong about that world where the people that have capital, that use their capital to invest in order to get more capital, it's an extractive process by people who don't actually create the value. They don't invent anything. And this would be the banks. And it's so you have the banks and Wall Street. The financial sector in America is greater than the goods and services economy. So to me, those are the capitalists. The capitalists is Wall Street, the banks. I have no issue with markets. An actual market where people come up with ideas and then they use money as a medium of exchange, and how we design that money is something that we need to talk about and work out. Like, I don't even have all the full answers, but I see a lot of problems here. Okay, that doesn't work, but maybe this will work. But to me, like, Wall Street shouldn't even exist. Like, it shouldn't even exist. We have this gambling thing that is extractive of the real creators. And so that's, to me, that's capitalism. Capitalism are the banks and Wall Street, which, I mean, all money needs to be is a ledger. You did this for them. Okay. You have a credit, you have a debit. That's all you really need for money. I mean, what's really needed to move forward and what really should matter is, okay, what's the labor? Are there people willing to do this work? And what are the resources to do this work? And if you have two people, if you have a need and you have someone that's willing to address that need, money should never be an obstacle to making that connection happen. And so how we design money really matters in terms of who has the power to create it. And we can get into Bitcoin and some of the problems that are associated with that. But that's on the capitalism thing. Yeah. I think this thing from David Graeber is really useful to recognize that we have both systems right now. We live in a capitalist system as well as a market system. There's two things that are happening at the same time. One of them I don't really have an issue with, although even within the market, it still needs to have limits. We need to be conscious of obviously we need to start being a little bit more conscious of resource. And I can get into there's some other issues I can get into with regard to that. But the capitalist piece of it doesn't need to exist. We can actually, and it's actually parasitic. It's actually really destructive to actual markets, really.
Well, let me, so my issue with the current system is exactly what you were talking about in terms of these capitalists are centralizing power, and they're using political systems, the government, essentially to help them to centralize power. So I don't think I have a problem in a free society without government influence with people pooling their resources together to build something that no one person could afford to build themselves, right? And then if they did that, and then as the, whatever they constructed, be it maybe a large corporation, but in the old school, when corporations were sort of first being formed, it would be, we want to build a bridge for our city. And so everybody in the city would buy quote unquote stock in the bridge building. And then when the bridge was built, they'd charge everybody a little bit to cross the bridge, and people would get paid back their investment plus some profit for the effort. And so in my mind, if there is a society, so I guess the first place to start with this would be the issue that I have. One is that there are laws that restrict the number of markets that are around in the world. I mean, we have the New York Stock Exchange in New York, and I can't just start the Mendocino County Stock Exchange here in Mendocino, right? Which would allow local community members here to pool their resources into a local kind of stock exchange situation where we could invest in our own community in this way. And I, if that were possible, and I think in a free society, it would be possible if there weren't all these barriers to entry that are put up by the government, which are backed, and the government laws and rules are manipulated by these capitalists, this capital class. I was going to say Derek Bros calls it the predator class.
They're mafia.
I mean,
it's mafia. Like
it's a mafia, right?
They're cartels. Exactly. They're gangsters. But
yeah.
But I don't think the solution isn't to play their game. And that's kind of my issue is you guys, it's like, well, we want to play that game too. And I'm like, no, that's a bad game. Like I can tell you how the game of Monopoly ends every time. I'm not psychic. You can read the rules of the game and, oh, this game ends with everybody owning everything. So the rules of the game are really important, and some of the crypto space folks are actually adopting some of the very problems that are with this system over here, even though the language sounds like, oh, but that won't exist in our system. That cronyism isn't going to exist over here. But I can show that that's just not the case. I mean, it's actually there's things that are built into it already, like right at the outset, that sets it up to having a certain group of people having more power over others, and not just based on merit. I mean, I know people like to throw around the idea of meritocracy, and I think it's a great idea, a meritocracy, but also even within a meritocracy, nobody should have that much power. Even if you created a great product and everybody wants it, you still shouldn't be able to have mass, someone someone that has $1 billion or even multi-million dollars, and you have other people that have like nothing, they have like incredible amounts of power over others. So I want to design a system that truly decentralizes power. Like whether it's on the private side or the left is more concerned about the power that that the corporations have, and rightfully so. And the right is more concerned about the power that the government has, and rightfully so. I mean, when we all know that they're actually working hand in hand.
Well, that's just it, right? It's one system. I like, in this podcast, I'll call it the government corporate complex, to try to get people out of that mindset.
Well, now the nonprofits,
right?
And they have what's called they had the third sector, which was the nonprofits, and now they're calling that the fourth sector, which are the public-private partnerships. So there's like this new, the B Corp. There's like this new class of corporation that's like straddling like the idea of public-private, but it's not accountable to the public,
Right. That's how they're getting around pesky things like the Constitution that require that hold back the power of government. Well, it's the government's not doing this. It's this public-private partnership, and they don't have to care about human rights,
Well, they sound like they do.
Yeah, right. But they sound like they do. And they're good. They're great at marketing and making it sound like what they're doing is, for the good of all humanity. So we shouldn't be frightened about how much control they're going to have after they implement the system. Right?
Yeah. And that's where I'm, a lot of people never understand where I'm coming from, because they always want to put me into some category. Oh, you're a leftist or whatever. Like I'm totally opposed. Just because I'm anti-capitalist, I'm just as much opposed to the government power as well. I actually believe in smaller government. I do believe in a commons. I do believe that there's something that all of us collectively, I know people hate that word, but like I think that there is, I do believe in the idea of a commons, that there are things that we all have, should have. I don't even like the word ownership, but have rights to, access to. And that, but so I don't fall into any particular category. So it's a lot of times people are like, have a hard time, like, figuring out where exactly I'm coming from, because there's no historical, framework for them to put it into.
It's a problem that I share with you as well. I mean, once you kind of break down the left-right paradigm and then you start looking at so many options, it's challenging to understand how to get them all to coalesce. And I guess this is why I tend to just fall on the side of the non-aggression principle, where if you're not attacking someone, if you're not being on the offense, if you're not, having power over someone, and everyone's working together consensually, then whatever is happening is sort of fine by me. I mean, I don't think that we can design a system, I mean, this gets into the idea of the self-organizing system, that an economy, like the state of nature, like in nature, there's no one, the lion doesn't tell the water where to flow. And I think economy can work.
But if you had the money, and water needed money, and only the lion had money, the lion could tell the water where to go.
Well, I mean, so I want to talk about this because you brought it up, and this is
it could build a dam.
Right.
The lion can build a dam. You can pay people to build a dam and divert the water.
Sure, but this is the idea again that one person can amass, is going like this is what I get, say, from the communist camp. I mean, the typical communist argument would be that in a free market, which then they argue the strong will dominate the weak, and you'll have this capitalist system like you're talking about, this cartel system, and then eventually the cartels will duke it out, and then there's going to be like one winner at the end of it, until the whole system collapses, and then you have some kind of a communist thing. And you brought up this idea that how the game of Monopoly ends. One person owns the whole board, right? I mean, that is true in the game, but in a free society where there were multiple currencies, I mean, thousands of currencies that people could choose from. Do you see how would it be possible that one person could amass so much power? Even if they amassed so much of one of the currencies, people could just use another one. They don't need...
Because what you end up is you end up with a de facto monopoly. So whatever, like right now, like everyone's on Facebook. There are other choices, and like I would rather not be on Facebook, but this is where everybody's at.
Right.
So like you have a dominant currency and everybody's using this currency. I have another currency. Hey guys, like okay, there's like one guy down the road that will like, fix my bike, with this currency. So you end up with de facto monopolies, and so it is really important. And then like, so for example, with Bitcoin, like I know this conversation started with Bitcoin. Did you want to say something?
Well, I just want to say, I mean, I think to me that's a great leap, that there's going to be a de facto monopolization of the market. I mean, if there's only one guy that can fix your bike down the street, then he can charge whatever he wants. So you have some incentive to learn how to fix bikes and charge a little bit less than the guy down the street, and all of a sudden you're making a good living. And assuming there's plenty of currency going around in the system, and the bike guy down the street can't just come over to your house and break your legs, right? Then right, how does this automatically result in a de facto?
You need to have a certain number of people that are using it. So once something gets established, that's why these companies, like, that's why they always like to give you free shit, like right at the beginning, because they know once they have everybody in there, they got you,
Sure.
Like, you're not, it's really hard to like organize and get everybody like to, so if you have like currencies scattered all over the place, which by the way, I'm not against having multiple currencies. I'm just saying we need to be smart about this. And we also should be really conscious about which ones we're going to support, especially in the outset, right? Because once they get established, then you've got like, you're already like in this, you've already got buy-in into the system. And so, it's important to make sure that the ones you're going to support are good. And also, like, I don't know if you're familiar with Stephen Zarlenga, but he wrote The Lost Science of Money, which is a really, really powerful book. But he goes into a lot about some of the problems with even having multiple private currencies, and how they can become like local monopolies, essentially. And because there's other ways to coerce people than just straight violence. Of course, violence is always a preferred method. I don't know if it's preferred. I mean, I think they would rather do it other ways. But there's other ways to get people, to coerce people into using something.
A lot of psychological manipulation, like you're talking about, giving free stuff, getting people hooked. But again, when you're talking, let's say, just going back to the Facebook conversation, I mean, there are options that are out there. And if there was no government, if Facebook hadn't had the backing of certain government institutions in the beginning, if there was more of a free market, I mean, heck, if the whole internet probably would be peer-to-peer and decentralized if it wasn't for government and corporate intervention on that level. And we'd just be living in a totally different world. So I think it's difficult to draw conclusions based on what in a free society, what would a free society look like, and then compare it to the current situation, because it's so radically controlled from the top down already.
Yeah. Well, I'm in agreement with you with the problems with the current system. I mean, there's no doubt. I mean, these corporations and these institutions, they're cartels, and they work hand in glove with the government and the military and even the intelligence agencies.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's and now the foundations and nonprofits. I mean, I don't view them as separate entities. I just see them as different branches of something that's whole. So, but I mean, the discussion we had about Bitcoin specifically was, you have right from the outset, they designed a system where the people who get to create money are the miners.
Right.
And first of all, that's a problem right there, because you need to have like a fast computer. And now we have like these huge computer farms where like companies are amassing all this wealth, Bitcoin wealth, which is not real wealth. It's all fake anyways. But, they're amassing all these Bitcoins. So right there, right at the outset, you have a certain class of people that have power over other people. So then everybody has to go to them and say, hey, I'll do work for you. Would you, or they can say, I'm going to give out grants. But again, it's giving them the decision-making power over everybody else. The other problem that I have with it is that it can be purchased. They can be purchased with Federal Reserve notes. Well, we know the Federal Reserve can create as much money as it wants, as other central banks. And so, right there, they can inflate it and crash it. Like, it's already built into the system that they can manipulate it all day long. And then the other thing is, it's got a commodity value. And one of the things I took away from Stephen Zarlenga that I totally agree with is that money should never have a commodity value. And I know this, like, the gold bug people won't like to hear this. We had a Great Depression under the gold standard, by the way.
Well, also for reasons of corporate control of the gold market, and the Federal Reserve's
we don't even know how
manipulations
much
at the
gold
time.
there is in the world, and we don't need to be mining
Right.
more gold anyways. Like the earth doesn't need more mining. All right. Um, we can get into the problems ecologically with the economic system, both the monetary and the market-based system. There are some serious problems within those frameworks from an ecological standpoint. And so that people look to the World Economic Forum and the Great Reset, like, oh, they're actually talking about addressing this. Of course, they don't give a shit about the ecology. I mean, they're building data centers. And if you know Corey Morningstar, if you're watching the interview I did with her, she's talking about how like the amount of energy production it's going to take for these data centers is just immense. So, but anyways, I lost my train of thought. Oh, Stephen Zarlinga. So he said money cannot have a commodity value, because if you have a commodity value that's speculated on, the value of your money will fluctuate. And you don't want your value of your money. You don't want your money. Oh, like how much money do I have today? Let me look online and see. You want your money to be, to be, it's a set standard. So if you have a thing, it's a boom and bust sort of mentality. And again, that's the capitalist Wall Street mindset that we need to come up with a new system. And by the way, I'm not saying I have the answer, but right. I do see problems within these different systems, including the government, even people that want just the government to create all the money. There's problems there that we need to figure out, that I don't have the answer to. But that's why having these conversations is good. But the idea that money is a creation of law, historically, I mean, I know in theory people say we can just voluntarily set up these monetaries, and that has happened, but generally speaking, if your money has a commodity value, I'm switching subjects here, but I went off track there. But if your money has a commodity value, then it perverts its use and role as a medium of exchange, because you don't want your money to be worth $100 today and $0 tomorrow.
Well, I mean, this is the thing, though. I mean, you're talking about money fluctuates in value, but money, money again. We've kind of alluded to this already, but money itself really doesn't have any value. Its only value is the medium of exchange, and so it gets pegged to something else, and it gets compared. So its value is only in comparison.
But that's not true. Like, I mean, all money should be as a measurement. Like, it's just all you need is some accounting, and that's all you need. It's like measuring the things people are doing for one another.
But if people start to make up money out of thin air, like when the gold guys, started offering script, which is basically how cash got started, and then they discovered, well, I can offer 10 times as much script as I have gold. So if you're the guy in charge of the ledger and you start cheating, then there should be maybe another. I mean, if there's another commodity or dozens of other another currency or dozens of other currencies that people can choose from, then the value of your currency only has that value in relation to the other currencies, and there is an exchange and a fluctuation that happens, and so you have to stay honest and virtuous, or else your commodity will crash.
If nobody accepts these other currencies. And so, and that's the problem that we get into even within a voluntary. So let's say Bitcoin becomes the dominant thing, like people start using, which I don't see that happening, but I do think that, it seems to be that thing that a lot of people are, that want to get out of this system are leaning towards. And I'm just saying that, well, actually, if we're going to get out of the system, let's actually get into something that's actually that doesn't have, the seeds of its own destruction built right into its very design, which Bitcoin does. Absolutely. Where I'm differing with you, like you bring up the fact that, well, the miners automatically have this kind of monopoly on the wealth creation, and that gives them the power as they're creating the currency. What I perceive is happening is that Bitcoin, essentially because it was the first, is going to be the standard, the general standard by which all the other currencies are compared to. And that's all it's going to be. I don't think people are going to spend it very much. I think people are maybe hold it long term as a kind of a retirement investment. It has a speculative, it's trying to do two things. And I think that these two things are in competition with one another. On one hand, it's wanting to be a medium of exchange. On the other hand, it's wanting to be a speculative investment for people. And these two values, these two things things are actually in direct competition with one another. They can't both coexist. One of them is going to win out over the other one. And I can tell you which one will win out. It's the speculation thing that will destroy its use as a medium of exchange. So we need to create a money. We need to, if we want a money system that's going to be used as a medium of exchange, it cannot have the speculative investor investing money in it in order to make more money, the capitalist kind of mentality of it. Like, I'm going to make money off of, I mean, just the idea, I mean, this is a basic thing, like just the idea that I'm going to make money off of doing nothing. I'm going to spend money. I'm going to make money off of. I think that mindset, there's something perverted about that mindset that for some reason people still like have this belief that, when Bitcoin came out, I was calling it tulip coin because of I don't know if you know about the Dutch tulip craze. But to me, I see it's the same mindset. It's like, oh, this is worth a bunch of money. Well, what makes it worth money? Like, it's crazy.
I see the speculative aspect as actually ensuring that it's holding on to its virtue. It forces the system to be honest. So the people who are doing the speculating, who are professional investors or professionally working the market. Their job is to make sure that that the variety of different currencies that are on the market, and again, the market has to be a free marketplace. It can't be controlled by any kind of central player, or else then you're just looking at a cartel system again, and everything that you're talking about becomes true. But in a free market, then the speculative aspect has the function of ensuring that the currency maintains its integrity, and that no one person then can just I'm going to create 1 billion more Bitcoin and I'm going to have all the Bitcoin in the world, right? Because if you do that, then it's going to crash on the market.
Yeah, there's two separate issues in there. One is, how money is created and who has the power to create it and what it's created for. And the other one is people, buying money to speculate on it or creating the money to make money. Those are two different things that I think need to be talked about individually.
Sure. I'm just talking about the market exchange right now, the speculative aspect.
So money, there should never be a money market exchange. Like, there should never be buying and selling of money for the purpose of profit. You know how George Soros got so rich, right?
Right. But
and actually many of these people, by the way, that are doing a lot of harm to the world got rich and they've crashed entire economies. Their speculation on money has crashed entire economies and left millions of people destitute
within the context of a fixed market, not within the context of an already monopolized market with a central banking system. If there was a free currency market, they wouldn't never have
still have the same issue. If you have people speculating on money, and like, let's say we have a bunch of independent, currencies that people then are buying and selling as speculative investments in order to make a profit, you're going to get that same thing. You may not be as extreme as some of the things we've seen with, like, for example, I mean, that's how the Rothschilds made their money, like speculation.
They helped to create this central banking scheme.
They were definitely one of the key families, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, not the only one, but for a major one, for sure.
And that to me is how these you're talking about these cartel guys, these mafia figures who fix the market and then skim off the top. But in a free market where you can't fix the market because anyone can participate, and if somebody tries to fix the market, they can either get punished.
It's beyond just fixing the market in some way. It's even like just the booms and bust. Everybody's investing here, even if it's a free market. Everybody's investing here. All of a sudden, your currency goes up and then it goes down because everybody jumps out. That is not a healthy system. That is just not for what you want to accomplish. You're trying to do two things at once here, or not you, but people that are operating in this space. They're wanting to make the world a better place, and they want to have something that's stable as used as a medium of exchange that will help facilitate market exchange that's healthy, that creates things and does things for people. And then you have this other thing that wants to invest money. And like, it's gambling. It's straight up gambling. Like, you're gonna pull your money out when it's doing bad and put it back in and then if you have a bunch of these, you can start doing that. But that's gambling. That's just straight gambling.
It's so interesting that, the way I look at it is that if you have a healthy market, a healthy currency market, it's going to be really stable. And you're actually not going to see these big swings, except for maybe in certain specific newer areas, a new currency joins the market. Maybe there is a lot of speculation going on with a new idea that's being invested in with a new kind of currency or whatever. And a lot of people will, trade their Bitcoin for this new currency because they think the idea is going to take off. I mean, I'm sure there's going to be some currencies, but I would expect that ultimately, like the Bitcoin or some of these will become very, very stable investments and not have these boom and bust cycles over time. If the market is allowed to remain a free market, it's not cartelized or centralized in any way. And, I mean, maybe this is a good time to kind of talk about this difference in opinion between how the blockchain technology is used, because there are people that use the blockchain technology for centralization. But there's a lot of market pressure in the blockchain space and in the cryptocurrency space, especially, to keep it more decentralized, more on this peer-to-peer level as much as possible. So the more centralized the currency becomes, the less the market, wants to go in that direction, because nobody wants to be a slave to a power monger, right?
Well, that's what's
why would the market grow to create a power, this powerful individual when nobody wants to invest in that? They want to invest in their own freedom.
Yeah. So this is what's really kind of perplexing to me about this whole thing is that so many people within the crypto space, the things that they believe in, the thing that they're doing doesn't actually get them to where they want to go. A lot of so, but I'm involved with like Ethereum and different spaces that I've interacted with a lot of people in those spaces, and it's kind of like it's a mixed bag. You have like young idealist people that want to do the right thing, and then you have like venture capitalists,
Sure.
and I want to harness that the idealists, the people that want to make the world a better place, and to have this conversation about the problems. And there are inherent problems with the design of Bitcoin. Now, I'm not opposed to actually ever using anything any kind of crypto as a medium of exchange.
Right.
I'm not like just no cryptocurrency ever. I think there can be used, and even Bitcoin can be used. I think Bitcoin will probably be used by some people to do things outside of the system that will be good and useful. I'm not like, this isn't a black or white sort of thing. I mean, even Federal Reserve notes like are used for good, like even though it's a bad system. But I can't get over the fact that with Bitcoin, the initial creation of the money, like some local tomato farmer from Mexico or whatever doesn't have a computer. He can't create Bitcoin money, but he brings value to this world. So now he has to go submit his value to these other people that have already just right as the money creation. They already have a lot of value, or whether they bought into it with Federal Reserve notes or they created it through the mining process. It's already right at its genesis, created a disparity in power, off the bat.
I want to address this issue too, though, because the person who's mining the Bitcoins needs tomatoes, so he's going to trade some Bitcoin for his tomatoes.
He doesn't need that many tomatoes. You've got, let's say you've got like, millions of dollars in Bitcoin that you mined. You all of a sudden will have like massive amounts of power over everybody else. Like, yeah, sure. There's a handful of people right now. You could go. There's rich people that need stuff that I can go, hey, I'll make a video for you or whatever. But I still come back to the power distribution problem, and whatever system we design should, right at its beginning, address this issue of how do we distribute power equitably and correctly.
I mean, I guess that's the thing, Jason, is that the difference maybe that I'm talking about is that we're not going to design a system that everybody's going to want to use, right? I mean, we can design a system that we like, and then you and I can trade with that. But, in a free society, right, some people are going to trade on a currency market. I mean, I think they just are. I don't see how you're going to stop them.
You can avoid that by creating a system that through the way that you can design a currency that doesn't allow for that. That would there's one of the stories in The Lost Science of Money by Stephen Zarlenga. And hopefully it's not distracting. I'm looking at my computer, even though my camera is up here.
No, it's fine. It's fine. Yeah.
But one of the stories he tells is one of the the emperors or kings or whatever. I can't remember which one. I need to revisit it. But he had created the money out of this this iron, and he actually had he made the iron very brittle. And so they would trade these pieces of iron, but they would break really easily because he didn't want the money to actually have a commodity value, because he knew that if it has a commodity value, it will start to be traded as an investment or be used for other purposes. And you want to create a money, if you want to have something as a medium of exchange, you need to create it with the sole purpose of being a medium of exchange. And we can get into, there's a lot of complications about how to do that, and I'm not saying that's a simple thing to do, but there actually are things you can do. There's designs that you can build into the very design of the money that make sure that the money doesn't have a commodity value, and that it's just simply used there as a medium of exchange. And then how it's created is
right. I guess I just, again, it just comes back to this. I think some people will create money that's backed by commodity value, and some
they
people
are obviously.
will well, I mean, let's just, in a free world, it's an option that some people will take. If they're in the gold business, they'll probably mine some gold and.
Well, I'm
and
not telling anybody they
bits
can't use Bitcoin. I'm just arguing that it's not a good. I'm just saying that it's not a good. It's not a very good design for accomplishing many of the goals that people say they want to accomplish.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's all I'm saying. I'm not telling anybody they can't do it. I believe in the non-aggression principle. I make my arguments and people can take them or leave them. I don't have any power over anybody. I'm just throwing ideas out there, and some of them are, obviously not mainstream.
I think that in a free society, you're going to have people that, I just think there's going to be all kinds of different kinds of money, right? I mean, there's going to be the money that the timeshare money that I just trade my hours of labor. And, there's going to be local currencies where I trade my labor locally. And there's going to be currencies that are just credit systems between industry. There's going to be all kinds of different, then some of the money is going to be backed by commodity, and it's all, I think then it all has to kind of compete with each other on some kind of marketplace. So we know the value if we're going to trade within. Like, maybe I want to buy some cannabis and there's a cannabis coin, and I have 100 timeshare hours from my local community, and I've got to have some way to trade, my timeshare hours for cannabis coins so I can go smoke a joint, right? I mean, that seems like that would be kind of how it works in a real free society where there's not this centralization and this cartelization of the currency system.
Yeah. But you're going to get that. I mean, it's just going to happen. It's just the nature of the beast.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why it's really important to, initially the money you design, to go into it, understanding all these pitfalls and trying to do your best to prevent those things from happening.
Sure.
And the idea of having we have multiple things. One of them is going to be dominant, and it's going to be dominant based on a lot of other things. That's not just free market. Everybody just, making their choices. And I want to say one other thing too, though, but about this whole idea, I mentioned it earlier, about just viewing the world through market exchange and competition. There's a different way of looking at the world, which is I'm more interested in cooperation. I actually, friendly competition, that's fine. But I think that there's too much emphasis on competition. And,
well, I couldn't agree more with that.
Who's my brain's just shut off. Darwin, he wrote Origin of the Species, but his second book, Descent of Man, he actually apologized for putting so much emphasis on the survival of the fittest, because he saw how that was being used by economists as a
social Darwinists,
as an excuse for I'm rich, but I'm rich because I'm just the dominant species, and I earn this and I deserve this. And that idea that people are rich, that we have a meritocracy, and the people that have money are they
somehow virtuous, right?
They're more virtuous. So he actually apologized, and then he made the point that actually in old growth forests, there's a lot more cooperation. It's really the younger, earlier species that are more survival of the fittest. But once an old growth forest gets established, there's an incredible amount of exchange nutrients and sunshine and all sorts of different things that there's a lot of more competition and harmony that happens in that space. So,
yeah,
and I think this is a different way of looking at the world. There's a couple of films that I recommend. One of them was put out by Smithsonian, which is, I'm not a big Smithsonian fan, but it was a good documentary. It's called The Grammar of Happiness. And it was a missionary that went down into, I can't remember the tribe, but some tribe down, I think in Brazil. And he was going to go there and convert them to Christianity, but he also was an anthropologist. So he was studying them. Actually, he was not an anthropologist. He was a linguist. So he was studying their language. And he noticed something very peculiar about them, that they didn't have numbers. They didn't have words for numbers. They had like 1, 2, and then a bunch, they didn't really they weren't as focused on counting. And somebody made the point, so a mother that has 5 kids somebody said, you have
a bunch of kids.
You have 5 kids, and she wouldn't be able to answer that question. She's like, how many kids do you have? She wouldn't be able to answer, but she'd be able to tell you who her kids were. But our emphasis on we've got too much of an emphasis on numbers and naming things and cataloging them and dissecting them. And we've got a mechanical view of the world. And I think that there's something, for lack of a better word, that's you're losing the essence, and there's something that we need to there's a connection here that can't be defined. It can't be calculated.
Right.
It can't be measured. That actually is more important.
Well, Jason, let me say this. I mean, I absolutely agree with you 100%. And that's why I believe in a free society. And I would argue that I
believe in a free society too.
Right. But so we have kind of maybe a different vision or whatever of how we can achieve that. But I would argue that a currency marketplace, for example, is merely an information exchange. It's just an exchange of information from the average person that, is working on the street and is using a couple different currencies, but prefers this one over that one or whatever. And then that information gets relayed through the currency market. So to my mind, the currency market is very much like the information that's exchanged within the forest, the root systems, the mycorrhiza, and the way that they're exchanging that information on this very subtle energetic level is very similar in my mind to the kinds of information that's getting exchanged on a currency market on that same subtle level, where you don't have to communicate with language, but you can just communicate it's like a way of gauging the pulse and the health of the society at large, actually, by having healthy currency markets. Now, a healthy currency market can only happen in a completely free society, right? As soon as somebody uses violence and starts to cartelize the system, then of course they're going to be the rich guys on top, and they're going to have, so we have to talk about how to prevent that from happening. But it's not the problem in my mind of the currency exchange itself, right? That to me is a reflection of exactly what you're talking about, a more natural and holistic way of viewing the world.
But if you're looking at money in terms of a natural thing, it's not. Money is a fiction. Money will always be a fiction. It's not. It's historically it's a product of the law. The law creates money. But this idea of the volunteerism, and that we all volunteer to agree to use this thing and we can leave any time, that's fine too. And I know in some small scales that does exist, but money is not a natural thing. And what it represents is really important. So what is this, this coin or whatever represent the value that this person created? They did something that it was value to me or the community, and this is just a mere representation of that we're going to go around and exchange. But the money should never have value in and of itself. It's always what it's representing that should always be at the forefront of what the value is. And with this, you have money. Bitcoin has value way beyond any actual value that it creates in the real world. That's a fact.
See, again, okay, you want to talk about the miners, when they first, the first miners who did it invested thousands of dollars in their computers and thousands of dollars into the electricity to do it. And they were making coins that were worth, 0 or 50 cents. And so they were counting on the fact that it would accrue money or would accrue value over time. And the only reason why Bitcoin has that value now is because compared to fiat currency, It's actually, I mean, the fiat currency is this cartelized, centralized system that just continues to print more and more. And this organization, you know, this.
Look, I'm not going to disagree with you
grow.
about the problems with the fiat currency.
Right.
You know, we'll be in agreement there. So.
I'm just saying that, you know, I understand where you're coming from about the idea of value, but I do think that, you know, all currency is basically just a representation of, to my mind, it's actually ultimately only backed by labor. It's just a representation of the labor value that you produce. I mean, labor, I labored, and it was
value is there's a valid validity there, but that's not what the Bitcoin is. Bitcoin is not labor. I mean, someone had some money, whether they were born into it or they actually earned it on their own or whatever, or they got a loan or whatever. Money. It was based on a fucked up money system to begin with, and all the massive disparities that exist within that framework already. And then this person or a government, I mean, and most of the, you know, who owns all the Bitcoin? Do we even know? I don't think we know, right? But I think, you know, large governments, and there's a lot of large institutional investors there that own a large portion of it. So they have a lot of power already right off the bat, beyond the actual labor or someone who's actually going to create something and do something. And so that's my big issue with it. And I'm not opposed to like having, you know, to some extent having multiple currencies, but you do kind of, with money, you do kind of need to have some kind of standard, and you want your money to be used at lots of different places. Otherwise, it's just not functional as a medium of exchange. If you know, you can have lots of money. If no one takes it, it's useless.
Well, I mean, I kind of think that's a good thing, because if a billionaire, you know, amasses one kind of currency, but it's not accepted in my local community, then that billionaire doesn't have any power in my community. And that's awesome, right?
The billionaire will be accepted. If a billionaire has that and wants to come into your community, I guarantee you he will have the dominant money system in that community within a short period of time. If you have $1 billion to spend, and, you know, people can say we won't take it, but there's ways to get people to take it. And then I want to read a quote real quick. There's another great book that I recommend people read, because when in studying money, I was like, there's something about this. I mean, you can look in the technical, like, how do they design money? How is it created? What's the interest? Do they charge interest or not? How to extinguish it? There's a lot of like technical aspects of how to design money, but there was another essence to it that I couldn't really put my finger on, because it's again, it's used in such ways to like shape who we are and what we do in life. So there's a book called it's called Theology of Money by Philip Goodchild. Mm-hmm. And I really found it useful because Philip is actually a theologian, and he talks about money in terms of theology. And if you think about it, it's actually a really great framework to talk about money, because it is like a theology. You have, you know, your high priests and people have faith in it. You have to have faith in it for it to work. Right. So this is a quote from Philip Goodchild's book. Striving for wealth and freedom has had the effect of subordinating humanity to the impersonal and abstract force of money. Once money becomes the condition of possibility of society, whether in the form of market exchange, capital accumulation, credit intermediation, or speculative disintermediation, then the value of money, however fragile, must be maintained at all costs. Indeed, the very fragility of the financial system, its vulnerability to frequent, I'm having a time. Crises. It is the very source of its spectral power. No institution, whether in the form of a state, a revolutionary vanguard, or a people, is able to control it. And I think we need to be conscious of that as we move forward, that money should never have value in and of itself, because the maintaining that value becomes more important than the values that we have in society. And anyways, his book has got loads of like great little lines like that.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think in a free society, money would just be a reflection of the labor that people put into its creation, and then I think, you know, the thing about it is when a new idea happens, when a person has a new idea, and this is actually, you know, I've thought about this in terms of socialism in general, or a lot of these sort of top down, like social engineering systems that think, you know, everybody, where we're going to create and design the system, and if everybody uses it, it's going to be it's going to be perfect. I mean, scientism, the idea of scientism, or the idea of technocracy, right? The scientists come up with the best way for everybody to be, and then they tell everybody else how to be that way. And so I call it the teleology problem. Like, how do we know where we're going to go from here? Right. I mean, right. Our culture is ever evolving. And the real question is, because what I kind of started to realize is what's happened with this cartel system that we have right now, where a few people control the monopoly of the money supply. They basically skim off the top of the entire economy, plus have the power of the purse, so they can also make as much money as they want out of nothing. They basically do whatever they want. And they also, one of the things that I've noticed is that the corporate system, if you will, and when it combines with the military industrial complex and all of the classified things that are going on, they're developing technologies that are defining how the human race is moving forward. And they're actually kind of controlling technological advance because they have so much money. They're deciding of themselves, this technocratic class is deciding, we're going to build these technologies, and our whole culture is going to evolve in the direction that we socially engineer it to go, because, we're gods on earth or whatever. The opposite of that is a self-organizing system where all individuals make freedom of choice, have their own choices. And, I prefer to use paper clips instead of staples, or whatever it is. And every day we all make a lot of different choices. And to me, that's what I'm talking about. The value of money then is to inform the system. When I make that choice, it informs the whole system at one time, just like the tree in the forest that's passing the mycorrhiza on from one tree to the next, or getting this information across. It's like a wireless data system, but it's this currency system that says everybody on the chain, when I choose to spend an extra 5 cents on the staple or on the paperclip because I prefer the paperclip and I don't buy the staple, then everybody on down the line knows, well, we got to make some more staples, or I'm sorry, more paper clips. I'm trying to keep this together. It's this information system. But anyway, I just want to finish my point about this teleology then. So how do we decide how our culture moves forward? And to my mind, it's healthier. I mean, in a free society, we're all free to make our own choices. I think people are happier that we don't want to be slaves, right? We don't want to be living in this technocratic surveillance state. You and I certainly agree on that. But in a free society moves forward based on what ideas work and what don't, what ideas people like and what don't. So initially, when somebody has an idea, then, before there were paper clips, I invent the paperclip. And I go, man, I like it. It's working for me. I'm going to trade my labor for some currency, and I'm going to make a bunch of these, and I'm going to see if my friends like them too. And they go, yeah, we do like them. And then they pay you for them, and you're kind of amassing some capital. And then all of a sudden everybody wants it. Well, there's 7 billion people on the planet, and we need to make 7 billion paper clips. So we have to amass the capital to start, scaling up for everybody, because
only within a certain type of system. But go ahead.
Well, I mean, as your idea gets popular. And so initially then everybody's kind of turned on to this. They want to help invest. I mean, what I'm saying is initially there is going to be some speculation in that market. People are going to get excited. They're going to want to invest in the paperclip idea. But then once you've scaled up to the needs of the community and the broader community, and maybe even the worldwide community, then it kind of, your ideas has worked its magic, and everybody has paper clips now, and you kind of settle into a pretty stable, I got to make so many paper clips a month. And so then I think the speculative aspect to it dies down, and it becomes a real stable. Here's the value of your paperclip, and that's what you're left with. So I just think it's kind of a natural progression of things. And I think there's some value in the speculation, because some people have bad ideas, right? And they'll invest money into a bad idea, or their time and their labor, and their friends don't like it, and it just never takes off, and they have to try something else.
And they've lost that time and money.
Well, hopefully they learned and they evolved as people.
But your paperclips, the thing about your paperclip story is, at the end of it, you have the person that supposedly came up with the idea. We know that in reality, the overwhelming majority of patents are owned by people who didn't invent the product that they own. We know that that's the case.
Well, I will say, and now I'm not talking about intellectual property and patents with this. I'm talking about actually my labor made the paperclip, because I do have serious reservations.
Your labor
serious reservations.
Right.
That's
a whole other show.
I think I know, but I will say intellectual property is actually probably the biggest single fundamental cause for the amassing of wealth in the hands of the few.
Yeah.
I think you've got to get rid of that.
Yeah. We're in fact, I go, but my thing is like, whatever system that we have, like, we should design it in a way that doesn't allow anybody to have too much power. Period. There's just, even if it's a meritocracy, they came out of the grid ed, they did a lot of work. They still should not, however you design it, you need to design it in such a way that doesn't allow them to all of a sudden, even if they're well-intentioned, this person has massive amount of power over everybody else. Right. It's going to get abused, or it gets passed down to their kid. Usually their kids end up being assholes. More than the person that amassed the wealth.
I don't know how to, I do perhaps have a bit of faith that in a free society, much as maybe you have the opposite, you have this skepticism that, in a certain,
I'm not arguing against a free society, if that's what you think I'm arguing.
Well, I mean, I don't understand how you're going to stop, say, a currency mark. I mean, people are going to try ideas that are different from
I'm not telling anybody not to, people can do whatever they want. I'm just saying it's a bad system. If this is your goal, this is not a good vehicle to get to that goal. And I'm take my argument or leave it. I'm just telling you that this is not a good vehicle to get to where you say you want to get to.
Yeah.
And we need to go back to the drawing board. And I know there's some other people that have created some other types of cryptos that maybe do address some of those concerns a little bit better, but those concerns are really there and we can't just ignore them. And then there's ecological problems too, of like designing everything that's built on technology. We could do a whole show about that, but there's serious, significant problems with our use of resources and the use of labor in order to bring us a technology. I'm using lots of technology that, quite honestly came into my possession through a lot of exploitation. And I don't like that, but I'm using it to try to maybe push back. I'm not saying that it's right, but it is what it is.
I do believe that in a free society, the law of supply and demand would actually require sustainability. As something became more scarce, it would just become too expensive, and people would immediately start looking for better options, either more sustainable harvesting or a different technology that could do the same function more sustainably.
Well, I think we should question a lot of the assumptions that economists have given us about laws, like the law, like as if it's a natural law of supply and demand. Mm-hmm. I mean, we know supply creates, a lack of supply, or, scarcity can. Supply and demand does not have necessarily to do with what the actual need and demand is. Like that can be manufactured many ways, and it has. And even the supply and demand once again,
I prefaced all that with in a completely free society, right, where no one was able to be coercive.
Yeah. Where does that?
Well,
exist?
I mean, we should have the conversation about the contract and the property rights idea, because I think that, what we're talking about here then are still systems of self-defense. I think in a free society, there would be systems of self-defense that would actually be highly functional and prevent people from being authoritarian.
Yeah, we're probably going to have a lot of agreement in that area. Although the property thing is interesting, because I don't believe in intellectual property. And I don't believe I don't believe in absentee property. Actually, I believe so. I thought a lot about the property thing, because the irony is that a lot of the things that like anarcho-capitalists are trying to escape is literally because of property. I mean, who owns all the property in the world? Bill Gates now is the largest owner of farmland in America.
Well, and also governments. The government in the United States owns 50% of the land.
The Catholic Church, I think, is the largest. I think the largest landowner in America.
And McDonald's, actually, if you want to.
Oh yeah, for sure.
It's pretty crazy.
Movie, what's that movie with?
Oh yeah,
Batman. It's about the guy that basically corporatized McDonald's.
Oh, I haven't seen
Founder.
It.
It's called Founder. It's a phenomenal movie. It's got who's the guy that played Beetlejuice? Batman.
Oh,
I can't think of his name. Anyway, but it's got him.
right.
He plays Ray Kroc, who he didn't found McDonald's, but he claimed that he found it, but it was actually he stole it.
Right.
It's a really good movie though, but it's all about how McDonald's, they said, no, forget about you don't make hamburgers. You're in the land business. And that was the whole thing. They said that this is a land
Right.
business. This is where you can make your money. You're not going to make
Yeah.
money flipping burgers,
Right.
you know? Anyways, it's a really good movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the property thing. So I thought a lot about this because I come from a background of like being concerned about human rights. And I was like, it's always presented as your rights. You derive your rights through property. So you get rights based on the property you own. Your freedom of speech. If you're on private property, you don't have freedom of speech. I can't go into a mall and they say this is private property, get out, and the cops will come in and kick me out if I
right.
So you don't have freedom of speech. A lot of your rights are actually null and void through property. And a lot of people don't think about this is opposite than what people are used to thinking about. And I don't believe your rights, you should have rights based on your property. In fact, I don't believe anybody should even be able to own land. I like the Native American approach, which is like, we're stewards of the land. We have a right to live on the land.
Well, I was going to tell you, because I don't like the term property rights either. But I think you could replace the term property rights with stewardship rights, and it would function the same way.
And responsibilities
too. You don't own it, but the function of property rights, to my mind, as again, I prefer the term stewardship rights, because I think, and I also want to preface this conversation with, first and foremost, a property rights system, or as I like to say, a stewardship rights system, first and foremost means that you own yourself. So slavery is not possible under a property rights system, because everyone automatically owns themselves. If that's not the system that you're working within, if you're working within a system that allows slavery, that's not the system that libertarians believe in, let's say, or people that typically talk about. That's a perversion of the concept of property rights, because under the common law idea of property rights, everybody owns themselves, and so other people are liable if they injure you. If they try to make you into a slave, you can sue them and they're liable. That's the whole point. So that's first and foremost. And second of all, I think when it comes to quote unquote owning property, or as I prefer, being a steward of property, the property right gives you the legal opportunity under a common law system, if that's the system you choose to defend yourself and your property, to sue and call somebody liable who then trespasses on the property, and including toxic trespass. So any kind of poisoning, any kind of environmental damage that happens. I mean, it's a tool to be used to ensure that bad actors cannot just toxify the environment to hurt your person or your property, the property that you are in stewardship of. And that to me is what it is. It's a self-defense system. So it's funny to me that so many people think of it as this tool that's used to sort of hoard or amass, or it's my private property, so I can trash it. Well, it is in this perverted system of government and corporate control.
That's been the system forever, though. Like,
well,
the idealistic system you're talking about hasn't existed. Like, it's never existed.
Well, I think it's unfortunate. If more people chose it, then they could protect themselves with it. And when it started in when common law, the concept, I think, started in England, it was used to fight the feudal system. I mean, those were the ideas behind the Magna Carta, and the ideas that the feudal lords.
But the overwhelming majority of people were not a privy party to that. I mean, there was a handful of powerful people fighting a handful of more powerful people, but the overwhelming majority of humanity didn't really benefit from that necessarily.
Well, it's
maybe
unfortunate.
They did. Maybe there may be some secondary benefits, but.
Well, I mean, the same can be said of the United States Constitution, which tried to found itself on the same common law concepts, but didn't include women or people of color, and certainly not indigenous Americans. So, and I also don't think it's necessary, if somebody else wants to use a different system of self-defense, they're more than welcome to. I mean, but if I choose to use a stewardship rights system of common law, then I don't see that as being a problem.
Well, I think that you mentioned, so someone owns themselves, and that will stop slavery. Well, I have a book by Kevin Bales, who founded anti-slavery Free the Slaves. It's an American anti-slavery organization, and it's
Mhm.
basically talking about how they're according to his book, there are 27 million people still living in slavery today,
Right.
even though it's outlawed
I think
officially.
it's a worse problem now than it's ever been in history, right?
Possibly.
I
But he
think
gave
so.
an example of like a young girl, like there's a poor family in I can't remember where it was, like Thailand maybe,
Mhm.
that would sell their daughter off. Like it was under false pretenses, but they knew that it was sketchy, like, but they didn't have a choice because they don't have any money. They're broke. And so they sold her off to go work in some other country, and then next thing she knows, she's in indentured slavery. But they entered into that contract because they were poor. They didn't have any other choice.
Right.
And so that's the problem with contracts, is like people say, well, people don't have to work in sweatshops. Well, you do if you don't have any money and you need money to live and you need money to pay rent because of property and you have landlords that are taking all your money.
Well,
That's another conversation.
well,
but my point is, let me just finish and then
we're going back to the currency problem.
well, it's not,
Okay.
yeah, it's the currency problem, but it's also property. So my two things are money and property. You change what we use as money,
Yeah.
and then you change laws around property. I don't think, everyone should have human rights. Human rights are above property rights. You don't get your rights based on your property.
Right.
You have rights because you have inherent rights as a human being. I have a right. You
Well,
have a right to live on the
absolutely.
land. Someone that's sleeping, a homeless guy that's sleeping down there, the cops come up and harass him because he's on either private property or he's on government property. That shouldn't exist, and that's again, like, that there's even the left, like, it believes in property, and I don't, in a way that I don't agree with it. And I love the Native American view. They're like, how can you own land? How can you own the birds? You go, like, it's crazy.
Right.
But I think that sort of view of the world, of looking at things through money and property, needs to be put in its place. And that doesn't mean we can't, like, I'm okay with using money as a tool if it's done right. Property needs to be radically changed in terms of how we think about it. Like, you have a right. Now you need to have, I do believe that we should have some sort of like I wouldn't even call it a government, but you have some sort of entity that is there to moderate, like, disputes over property, or, I don't even want to call it property, but over
Right.
land. Like, there's someone that's using
that's
this
what
land.
I see. That's what I see.
Someone that's
Right.
using this land
I
for their
see a
business.
common law system of.
Go ahead.
Well, just to interject here, that's what I see a common law system as. It's just a legal system, and I actually see these property rights that we're discussing as really symbolic. Symbolic of, if you've toxified my person or my property, then you're liable, and I deserve restitution. And it's a way of measuring liability claims when someone has aggressed against you. And again, if you don't want to use this system, then use another system. And then there would be, I think, systems of arbitration that work within, systems.
Yeah. Well, there's a book called The Land We
that,
Share about the history of property. If you start to read about history of property, it's actually really hard. There's not very much out there. You have to go back to, like, Proudhon's book, What is Property? Or,
right.
there's not a lot written about that, but he gives the history of at least property in America since, like, the founding of the country. And it's called The Land We Share. And in it, he was talking about the idea that we have around property as being an absolute right to use and abuse, do whatever you want, is actually a very new concept. It actually started during the industrialization. Whereas, like, when the country was founded, you had just as much responsibilities as you had rights as a property owner, like, in terms of even cutting trees down, or, like, using water that someone else might need downstream. There was a lot more stewardship,
that's just it,
like, built into the law. But what happened is, during the industrial age, industry said, hey, this way of looking at property is not functioning very well, and we've got war to support. And so you need to basically, change these laws around. And he goes through all the legal stuff of how they changed the legal definition of property. So our idea of property, in terms of just absolute right to use and abuse as we see wish as an owner, is actually a new idea. It's not even 200 years old.
Well, and even the concept, I mean, some people will abuse their property. They're just not very good stewards, but then their property is going to, decrease in value compared to other properties. And if their toxic waste because they're, if it spills over, like if it gets into the water table, then and their neighbor's water gets poisoned, then their neighbor deserves restitution for that aggression.
Well, if we're talking
right?
about individuals or even a group of individuals, that's a different thing. But what we see with corporations is
Sure.
they don't give a shit. And even even the idea of paying restitution. Okay, fine, we'll pay restitution. Whatever, money's we'll just add it into the budget.
Look what corporations have done. First of all, they don't. I mean, all the waterways that they poison, there's no any kind of property rights for the people downstream that are getting poisoned. Look what happened in Flint. Yeah. It's just a disaster. And everyone calls it a government disaster, and nobody ever points the finger at the corporations that poison the water.
It was a public-private,
just crazy. Yeah.
It's not one or the other. And that's why like this whole left-right thing needs to just go away. Like people need to stop. Like we can disagree. And I think even in this conversation, there's stuff we've agreed on and there's stuff we disagree on, but this is what we do in a healthy society. We have discussions and, and we go from there. And then like, maybe I've changed my views a lot in my lifetime, and I'm sure I'll change them again.
Oh, I have too. Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, and the other thing is the corporations really got into this whole idea of regulation where they're allowed to toxify to a certain degree as much as the government allows them. And then through regulatory capture, they basically, where the fox runs the hen house there, they basically can get away with murder all the time. And nobody can stop them. I mean, it's this merger of corporate and government power is devastating for all of us. I mean, the bottom line is, my God, there are so many solutions out there. And at least we could be trying these solutions instead of letting the corporations clearly run all over us. I mean, this system that we have now that we've discussed is a system of debt slavery where we're all scurrying around competing with each other, trying to pay off our debts when there's not enough currency for us to be able to do that. And then, we've got this technocracy now staring us in the face where in another couple of years, we're all going to be under total surveillance and completely beholden to, these government systems for just our basic needs. And if we don't get the education and do the jobs that they want us to do, we're going to be off the reservation, right? We're going to be thrown out of the
that's what I love
city.
about Allison is she's constantly reminding people of and Corey as well, and there's others reminding people of how indigenous people have been treated around the world and even in this country. And you can really, if you want to understand the system, like study that, because that is the system. If you don't think that this system is different than that and somehow they're going to treat us with a more even hand eventually, I mean, it's coming for us. And a lot of indigenous people have even said that, like, hey, they're after us now, but you're next if you guys.
Well, what's interesting is that my interpretation of what's happened is that we've all been colonized. If we're not a member of the predator class, right? If this upper class, this investor class that you call it, then we've all been colonized. And maybe those of us who've been assimilated into the colony for longer, we're given a little more of the crumbs from their table. But honestly, we need to decolonize, learn from indigenous brothers and sisters, and, figure out a way different, lifestyle that works more holistically with the way the planet works, the way that nature works, so that we can be independent and no longer dependent on this empire, right? This corporate empire that sucks our life. I mean, it's kind of funny because it's considered whatever white privilege that, the white male gets access to the education or the corporate job and climbs the corporate ladder. But I don't want to work for the corporate system is a disaster, is a slave system. I don't want to be on the top of that system. I don't want that privilege. I mean,
well, I'll say this too, because I'm the same way, like,
so that we can all live together.
I don't want to be ruled over, and I don't want to rule over anybody.
Right. So it's pretty simple.
I think, the goals and outcomes that we want are very similar. And I think that, I think we need to have more of these conversations. I will say this, though. I don't think our problem is a technical problem. I think and I hate this. I don't like to use this word, but I don't know what other word to use because I'm not religious. but I think it's a spiritual problem, and I don't know what other word to use. And when I use that
Well,
word,
I agree with that.
When I use that word, what I'm really meaning is having an empathy for other life on this planet and other human beings and our relationship. It's all about relationship and having a healthier relationship there. And that needs to be the core of whatever systems we design, whatever technologies we utilize. We need to incorporate all those things, including the problems that are associated with it. A lot of times we see something, we're so excited about it. We're like, oh, this is so cool. Like, look at this technology and look at all the cool things we can do with it. And I liked what
Right.
Neil Postman, who wrote "Amusing Ourselves to Death," and then he wrote Technocracy, Technocropoly. I can't remember the name. Anyway, but he was like, the technologists always talk about what you're going to gain with this new technology, but they never talk about what you're losing. And I think we need to think about what we're losing. And I think that I don't think that our focus should be so much on, the technology of cryptocurrency, or look at all the stuff that computers can do. That doesn't mean that we can't use those things, but those things need to be play second fiddle to what we want. And I actually, even though I have some disagreements with James Corbett, and I have a lot of agreements, actually. I've been watching him for many years, and I'm a big, I like his work, but he's more capitalist than I am. But I did appreciate, I watched his thing on the Greater Reset yesterday, where he was talking about not getting the cart ahead of the horse. And
I saw that as well.
Yeah. But I appreciated that he said that, because he was saying that the cart is the community, and that, or am I saying that correctly? Anyways, but basically all these things should serve the community. And we don't ever want the community to be serving it.
Right.
And so whatever system we design, it needs to be, we should never be subservient to it. That's why that quote from Theology of Money was valuable, because we get into these systems where the value of money becomes more important, or the value of property. Like, we're going to get our rights through this thing, as opposed to, no, we have these rights, and these things might help facilitate it. It's a matter of like a relationship between the two.
Well, I do agree with that. I mean, the legal system, the financial system, it needs to be a reflection of the human rights that we all have. I mean, and if your rights are being infringed upon, then you need a self-defense. We need to have a principled, system of self-defense to stop that from happening. Some kind of collective action, or, group action that understands the boundaries between, aggressive action and personal and individual rights, and will help you stand up, against aggressive action. And unfortunately, we live in a world right now where, I mean, the powers of aggressive action are just so, they're so powerful.
Yeah, I was flipping yesterday. I was flipping back and forth between watching the Greater Reset and the World Economic Forum, which was, oh my God, there's some terrifying things I heard yesterday.
I just found sitting there, I'm like, okay. I found out that a lady who actually really was a big influence on me, Rianne Eisler, I've interviewed her a couple of times, and she wrote a book called The Chalice and the Blade, which is more of an anthropological book about dominator culture versus partnership culture, and which I've taken a lot out of, and just understanding the difference in what is a colonizing culture, the difference between the colonizing cultures and the indigenous cultures, let's say. And now she's talking at the actual Great Reset in Davos, because her ideas, I think, have been really heavily co-opted. She ended up going down a road that I kind of disagreed with, because she started saying, well, socialist countries. And I think she would then say technocracy, like she just believes in the flowery language of the technocrats. Oh, we're going to build this society with scientists that is all equitable, and we are going to love everybody. And that's a matriarchal system.
A lot of it sounds good, but
if you
scratch the surface of it, you realize that it all falls apart.
Well, I do want to have the conversation. I think maybe we got another 15 minutes or so, and then we'll hit 2 hours. It's probably as long as we want to go. But I did want to hit this kind of fundamental disagreement that we were having about blockchain technology in general. And I don't know that you I don't know that you're necessarily hardline. It doesn't sound like you're super hardline, even though you have your suspicions, say about Bitcoin in general. But
I'm opposed
I
to. I
wanted
mean,
to make the
I don't
point,
think it's
and
a solution. Go ahead, though.
sure, fair enough. But I just wanted to have a conversation about the difference between the decentralized blockchains and the centralized ones, because I think that was kind of a fundamental misunderstanding, say, between the Derek Broses and the Alison McDowells, if you will, where
Again, I don't
Alison
like
is clearly doing all this research. I'm just making the delineation to kind of show the different sides of the paradox, if you will, as we have this conversation. But I'm with you there. I don't want to I'm not calling anyone out. It's just the frame of this conversation happened to come within the frame of that conversation. So anyway, I do want to touch on this point of, from the research that I've done, I mean, what Alison is concerned about and the blockchain technology that they are clearly rolling out in terms of this centralized blockchain technology, the central bank digital currencies, and the various different state applications of blockchain technology. I mean, these are very different from the cryptocurrency space,
agreed,
right? I mean,
agreed. Yeah, no, I never.
It seems like it just seems like a lot of people, as we're having this conversation, I mean, I appreciate that our conversation has been much more nuanced. So I just want to caution people, I guess, about having these big fights, especially amongst people. We're all fighting the technocracy here, right? I mean, unity's got to be the priority.
My criticisms of Bitcoin are independent of my criticisms of CBDCs, which is central bank digital currencies, which is what they're going to use the blockchain for their own thing. And even Ethereum, like Ethereum is obviously, I'm sure there'll be some good applications for it. And there are, but it's also being used by some of these impact investment firms for very nefarious purposes. And so, again, the nuance is important to understand, like, okay, here's the good, here's the bad, and here's the ugly. But my criticisms of Bitcoin are specific to Bitcoin, and I'm not conflating it with what the central bank is planning on doing.
Right. Well, I mean, from my research, and James Corbett did a great episode about this too, the Bitcoin PSYOP, where people just get confused about blockchain technology versus the different forms that it can take. I mean, at least in the cryptocurrency space, and as you're saying, there are problems, and you have to look at each specific currency for what they're doing and how they're doing it. But within the grand scheme of the space, there's a lot of market pressure to bear on decentralizing, and so these are decentralized, permissionless blockchains, right, where anybody can participate, and they're trying to at least create a system where there are as many nodes in the system as possible, as many miners as possible, so that they're not just, there's not going to be one miner that controls the whole thing, which is one of your issues.
But
right?
It's not one miner.
And
there definitely is a massive concentration of wealth and power already within that system before it's even being used as a medium exchange. In fact, it's not even being used all that much as an actual medium exchange, from what I understand. It's mostly a speculative investment for the most part right now. But I know that there are exchanges that are happening, but in terms of volume, it doesn't seem very high in terms of how much actual coinage there is,
No, I mean, I hear you. And there's a scalability problem that's happening because it takes a long time to pay for something in Bitcoin, because they have to, it takes a lot of computing power to cut the Bitcoin up and make the blockchain happen. And so sometimes the scalability problem makes it more dangerous, right? It makes it easier for people to kind of skim off the top, or like, I know I was doing research into this Lightning Network, which Jack Dorsey is investing in, that's a red flag for me.
There are already and Joseph Gonzalez, he goes by Bantam Joe on Facebook, but he's actually really good, because he's been looking at this, and he was into Bitcoin and understood how there are these intermediaries that are entering the picture, that are actually stripping away the peer-to-peer, the direct peer-to-peer relationship.
Well, and that's exactly what we have to watch out for, right? I mean, anyone, I think, anyone in the crypto space, if it doesn't continue to remain peer to peer, if it starts to centralize, then, I mean, and a lot of people now I wish we had a peer to peer internet. So there was a lot less centralization of the internet, and there was no Google.
Yeah. The internet was the hope of the internet was so great. And now we're starting to see that it's becoming a centralized system for control and manipulation.
Right. And that was, that was something that was done by, I think Allison does the research, and Whitney Webb to some extent, where and she always talks about I haven't read it yet, but the surveillance, the Levine book, Surveillance Valley. I mean, right, there's a lot of intelligence community involvement in the building of the centralized internet to make sure that we didn't have a peer-to-peer, we didn't have this decentralized free system. But, again, just to reiterate, so there is, to educate, maybe. I mean, to my mind, I don't want to use a cryptocurrency that's centralized. I want to use a cryptocurrency that is totally peer-to-peer and has as many nodes and as many, individual miners as possible, so that we don't see the kind of confluence of power that you're concerned about. And I would just hope that over time, the market pressure is going to tend towards the currencies that are more decentralized and away from the ones that are more centralized. And then we do see the flip side of this, these central bank digital currencies and a lot of these other currencies that state governments are thinking about, these blockchain technologies that are inextricably woven into the fabric of technology, of technocracy, as Alison McDowell points out. These are centralized, clearly centralized blockchain ledgers. I mean, it's a totally different thing. I mean, it sounds to me like some people are concerned that if they start using Bitcoin, then all of their data and the Internet of Things is going to get sucked into the Bitcoin, and everybody who uses their Bitcoin is going to know everything about them in the future. And yes, that's the intent of these central bank digital currencies. You get your UBI only if we give you permission and you give us permission to acquire all of your data, but we'll give you this digital wallet that you can use for use the central bank digital currency off of. But this is a different system of blockchain technology. This is a centralized system. And yeah, the technocrats are very hip to this one, but the cryptocurrency space is different. Not that it doesn't have its problems, but I think in the market of cryptocurrency, there's a lot of pressure again to ensure that it remains as peer to peer as possible and as decentralized as possible. Whereas the technocrats love it. For the more centralized, the better for them.
Well, I consider a lot of the people that are within that space to be allies. And even though if I have disagreements with them about this or that, or, specific uses of this specific, not uses, but the design, like a Bitcoin, for example. But I don't totally dismiss the idea of ever using any cryptocurrency for anything. I'm not like a hardliner against. I'm just saying, like, this particular one has some glaring design problems built right into it.
Sure.
Can I do one more quote from Philip Goodchild?
Yeah, sure.
Again, like it's interesting to think about money as we move forward in these spaces and trying to figure out like what's going to work or not. We can't just think about money in terms of the technical side, the design of it. We have to think about it in other terms as well. So this is a quote: "Money is that which is of most social value. It is the precondition for the realization of all other ends. All other ends must be suspended until sufficient money is obtained for their realization. Money thus posits itself as the supreme being, the focus of attention and desire, the principle for the realization for capital projects. Money posits itself as God, the principle of all creation." And I think that's just like a really interesting way of putting that, of like the idea that whether it's money or property, you want this, but you have to have this thing. Like it becomes an intermediary, and it can be useful if it's designed well. Mm-hmm. It can actually help facilitate and overcome a lot of the challenges, especially with larger projects. And like you said, but again, we need to stay at the root of what actually really matters. And a lot of my discussions, I don't know how many of my talks my interviews I've done, but one of my big things is recognizing what's real and what matters, what the real value is, and what's the fiction and what's the representation. So I see property, money, law, contracts. These are fictions, and they can be useful fictions. They can help us to do stuff. But at the end of the day, what really matters is the real, which is you and I, human beings, community, our ecology, the environment, the future generations, and that's the real thing. So we have a real world, and now we have these fictions that are actually taking over the real world in a literal sense. I don't view a computer as a real thing. I think it's a really amazing interface with incredible representations, but it's not real. It's a ghost. And when we start seeing it as a real thing, and they say, like, even the World Economic Forum, that you're not going to be able to differentiate the artificial from the real. And
you're going to be inside the virtual world. You're going to have a virtual twin that's inside. Yeah, it's crazy the way they're talking
ever manipulable. They can manipulate you all day long. And it should scare the shit out of people. I don't want to scare people, but this should scare the shit out of you. But realizing, just remembering what's real and what matters is life.
Right.
And we have these systems that are anti-life. And money in many ways, and property can and are be very anti-life. And so that's just kind of my my take on it.
Well, and look at the direction that it's, ultimately transhumanism, right? These people they worship the technology like you're talking about. That to me is a problem. To me, there can be a balance between these two, if I'll talk about them as the antipodes, the opposites of a paradox, right? The human, the organic on the one end, and the technological on the other end. And reality has got to be somewhere using a balance of the two. That the technology is a tool, but if you forget your humanity while you're using it, then what's the point of the tool? If you lose your freedom and just become a machine, what's the point? What have you done? That's a tragedy right there. You don't want to go there. I did want to mention one other thing about what you were talking about in terms of the story, because you kind of mentioned that on one of our Facebook exchanges as well. And I've done a lot of thinking about, what is a cultural mythology, if you will? Like, what is mythology? It's a story, but it is an important story, and we need to keep. So I agree with you about the story, but the question is the stories do have a function, and actually a really important function. The story that you believe in is, ultimately really your reality. And so, that's the purpose of conversations like this is where's the story going to go from here, right? To try to understand that we're in the process of writing that story. And we want to write one that, does create, an abundant life for humanity, and really for all life on the planet, with abundance and sustainability. That's the challenge.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
That's when I think the story is interesting, because I think the stories we tell ourselves need to be grounded as much as we can have them be in reality.
Yeah, right.
And I know there's a lot of people in the new age where, like, we just manifest our reality, and our belief creates reality. And certainly I think if you have a positive attitude, it's going to have an influence on your life. There's no doubt. But but I do think I did a show recently with Sherry Honkala, who's a formerly homeless mother and activist for many 30 years. And she gave a quote from Philip K. Dick, and the quote is, reality is that with which once you stop believing in it, doesn't go away. And I think that like whatever systems that we create, because when you have resources and you have money, you can live pretty sheltered from the real world, like, so to speak. Like I think about Bill Gates or some of these people, like, they have no idea. Like they look at this, like outside, like they don't understand actually what it's like to be to live in poverty, or how most of the world actually lives. And you can, or even like Lucian, or some of these people that are like doing the promoting like impact investments and stuff to help the world. And it sounds really nice, but you can tell they live a very sheltered world. They don't really understand the reality of people's lives that live in poverty. And so
Yeah.
I think that our beliefs, as much as, and I have, a privilege compared to most people in the world. I mean, I don't have money or anything, but, compared to most people in the world, I live pretty good. But it gives you the freedom to live in a fantasy land and create your own reality and all that. But I think that
Right.
we need to base our stories that need to be grounded in reality as well, but also imagination. Like the reality today does not need to be the reality tomorrow, and we need to look at in its ugly face.
Mhm.
But we also need to have the ability to imagine another reality and to work to create that other reality.
Well, that sounds good, Jason.
All
Thanks for
right.
coming on the show. It's
Yeah. Thanks
probably a
for having
good
this
place to
conversation.
wrap it up, but yeah, I mean, it seems like honestly we have some disagreements here and there, but it seems like, we agree that power needs to be decentralized, and we agree that people by and large need to live in a free world where they can make choices for themselves, and we can hash out. I think if we solve those two problems, then the rest of these issues, will get hashed out.
Yeah, for sure.
So,
And that's my thing, is I think that there's a lot of people in the crypto space that I consider allies. And my enemies are the people on Wall Street and the people in Davos and the people
right.
in Washington D.C. I don't. I mean, even the protests, like people on the left are all upset about the demonstrators, and obviously the ones that went in, that broke shit up, and whether they're paid or not is we don't know. But I mean, I have my suspicions. But to me, it's like it's a distraction. I mean, it's horrible and it needs to be dealt with. But that is not the center of that should not be the center of our concern.
Yeah.
We need to be focusing on the people that actually have real power.
I think that's how you can really tell that the whole system is corrupt, because there are so many good ideas out there, like all the stuff we've been talking about tonight, especially when it comes to monetary policy. There are so many smart people that actually make almost no money writing these crazy books about monetary theory, and they have so many great ideas about how to expand, abundance and wealth and happiness for everybody on the planet. It'd be easy to figure out how to make people, maybe not everybody could be rich, but people shouldn't be worried about where their next meal is going to come from or whether they can pay their rent. I mean, we just shouldn't have those stressors. And the ideas are out there. They're just available.
And there's plenty of land and resources to accommodate.
There's plenty. And so, the fact that no one in politics will talk about these things, I mean, come on, no one on the mainstream news is going to let you talk about, the public banking idea, for example.
Well, Dennis Kucinich actually sponsored a bill by the American Monetary Institute, AMI, the NEED Act, which would have nationalized the Federal Reserve and had the Treasury create money, not as a debt, but as an asset, and spend it into circulation, which is actually, if you look into them, I know like a lot of libertarians don't like government, but there are actually some really good ideas there that I think, I don't believe in like a one system. Like you said, I actually like the idea of having, some fallbacks, but being smart about how you do that. But yeah, the public banking thing as well. But the public banking thing is a problem if they don't. The problem with the Public Banking Institute is their system operates within the Federal Reserve System, and that's a huge problem. Like at the end of the day, we have to get rid of the system, and we have to literally take back the power of money creation. Whereas a public banking institution is basically just saying, well, states and local governments should be able to access the discount window at the Federal Reserve, and that's good. It would create more money for those communities, but of course, we all know how governments spend money. Like like they're constantly raising taxes, and then like, oh, the schools need help, and then schools need help.
Right.
Schools, I want money to go to the schools, but I also don't trust these motherfuckers. So,
yeah, I mean, to me, public banking was a great compromise. I actually did some local activism to try to get a local bank for our county here, because I think it is a way of basically using the corrupt system to at least keep the wealth in the community.
It would help. It would do some, just like, even Bitcoin. I know that there's some things that will happen within that space that will be helpful and useful to some people.
Yeah. Well, why don't you let people, we could probably talk forever. So why don't you let people know, where to find your work and give yourself a pitch. And
I bought a website
nice
that I haven't built yet.
Okay.
I need to do that. Maybe I'll do that this week, because it shouldn't be that hard. I just want to something simple and just throw my videos up on there. But I'm on YouTube. If you look up Argus Fest, ARGUSFEST well, not dot, but just Argus Fest. So it's Argus, like a character from Greek mythology. You can look him up. He's a pretty interesting dude.
Nice.
And then Fest, short for festival. So Argus Fest. That was a film festival I ran for many years. But yeah,
right.
my website is going to be, and I'll let you know if I get it out in time. But
okay, sure.
It's ifwewerehonest.tv.
Okay.
So hopefully I can get my ass in gear.
.tv. All right, sounds good. And I'll just remind people that they have been listening to The Shift. I'm your host, Doug McKenty, and you can find all my stuff. I try to get people to go to my website because all these third-party platforms have gotten so sketchy, and that's at www.theshiftnow.com. But if you look up The Shift with Doug McKenty, you can find me. I'm on YouTube and Twitter, and I have been expanding out to a lot of other social media platforms lately to try to grow my audience. And considering what's been going on again on all these social media outlets, that's kind of a challenge for guys that are talking outside the mainstream. But I'm also currently on Twitter at DMcKenty. So thanks everybody for listening, and thanks again, Jason, for coming on. I really enjoyed that. That was cool. We got to hash out a lot of good things and discover. I think we were really actually very much in agreement on the big issues, and then where we disagree on the nuances was just as important as where we agreed. So.
Yeah. Thank you,
Thanks
Doug.
for coming on.
These are important conversations.
Right on. All right. Have a great day.
Cool.
And put it up on the market. And tomorrow we eliminated the Federal Reserve and started to allow people to make whatever currency they wanted. So automatically we get rid of this artificial scarcity in land, and automatically we get rid of the artificial scarcity in currency.
Yeah.
And then I just think that within 6 months, you'd have no homeless people,
right?
Because property would be cheap and currency would be abundant, and you wouldn't have poverty. No one would be stressing out. No one would be in debt. You know what I mean? It would just solve almost all the problems. Just no matter how they worked it out. They've
built so many units like all over the world. I mean, even here, there are like luxury units that are just sitting empty because these investors are sitting on it, and that's what's happening with the World Economic Forum. Is these billionaires have all this money, which is fake. But they don't have anywhere to invest it. They've run out of places to invest it. So they have to invent new shit. And so they have all these abandoned, beautiful luxury condos that are just sitting empty to serve the investor class.
Yeah.
And I'm like, fuck that. Take that shit over. This is a leftist thing, but that's a leftist thing that I totally agree with. Like, fuck that. Like, you have a right to liberty, like, right to life. Like, I care about human rights, and if there's a homeless person and there's a fucking empty house that's not being used, fucking take that shit over. That's what my friend Sherry does. She takes over HUD homes mainly, but she puts up homeless people, and she for 30 years she's been putting homeless people up in abandoned mostly government property. She's taken over churches and all kinds of places.
Nice.
She's like, why are there homeless people when there's abandoned houses
everywhere? Well, I mean, what are they doing with this COVID thing? I mean, they're driving everybody out of business, and then the billionaires are going to buy all that land. I mean,
no, it's a people don't understand. Like, this is a global corporate takeover, and they've been working on this, by the way, for hundreds of years.
Yeah,
this goes back to, I don't know if you've read much about the enclosure laws in England.
A little bit,
but there are these, there's a process that's been happening to like move people off the land into the cities, and that's a lot of what's going on in India. They want to get everybody in the cities. They want to take their land from them and get them all into these cities.
I think that's what the Great Depression was here. There was a lot of family wealth in rural properties before the Great Depression, and they crashed it, and the corporations, big ag, sucked all that up, man. They sucked it up, and everybody had
the
to
letter
move into
that went
city.
out to the banks telling them to call in all the loans.
I don't think I've seen that specifically.
During the Great Depression. The Great Depression was a manufactured crisis.
Right. Yeah.
Completely. Yeah. And even World War I and World War II. These things are all. There's a design.
Yeah.
To all of this.
I'm right there with you. I mean, and I wasn't kidding when I like when we had our conversation about defining capitalism, because I just want to call this system feudalism, because that's what it is. The American Revolution was a little blip on the feudal colonial empire building, system. And they figured that, certainly by the Civil War, and probably well before that, they figured out already how to take over the US back again economically. And it's this corporate system. The corporate system is the system of feudalism. The East India Company was the transnational corporation, just like all the rest of them now are modeled off of that.
Yeah.
It's feudalism, and that's the system that they've imposed on us here. I want to call it feudalism, because that's what it is. It's not.
I think
it's not capitalism.
Understanding that markets and capitalism are two different things is really valuable.
And
I'll send you that text so you just so you have it, because if you want to read it. But it's I think it's a valuable way to orient yourself. And language is so hard, because again, people are talking about like socialism and capitalism, and they mean different things.
And don't you think they do that on purpose?
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
It's not by design. For sure.
I mean, fascism, right, is another term for what we're seeing, the corporate, the public-private. Yeah. I mean, clearly, why people are all like, oh, this is fascist and that's no, this system that we're living in now is clearly fascism.
Just because we don't all dress in the same outfit and whatever
Heil Hitler or whatever.
Well, exactly.
I mean, it's funny to me.
You can't study history without studying the financial history.
Right.
And so like, I know like people love studying World War II, and they're like, well, what about World War II? We had to do World War II. I'm like, well, actually that was totally unnecessary if you study World War I and all the debt that was created and how that was, and then they allowed Hitler to, they allowed Hitler to, they helped him into power. They wanted to use him as a bulwark against Russia, and he overstepped his boundaries a little bit, but he served his function.
I'm actually I'm doing an interview with Patrick Wood on Thursday, he's written a bunch of books about technocracy, but he was kind of the mentor of Anthony Sutton, who wrote these really interesting books.
He was the mentor or mentee?
The mentee, excuse me. Yeah, of Anthony.
I was like, Sutton. How old is this guy?
Yeah, no. So I'm going to call him. I'm going to talk to him actually about the history, about the Anthony Sutton stuff, and not so much the technocracy stuff. But I basically have a theory that the bankers, I mean, what World War I and World War II was the bankers like. I mean, like right now we're going into this great reset, and so they're reinstituting the debt-based slave system that they used for the 20th century with this new technocratic system, right? But in those instances, the communist revolution and the rise of fascism in Germany, you can really see the same Wall Street connections. They were building all of those.
They're trying different systems. They're like, oh, let's try this. It's all about power, though. That's all they want. They're like, what's the best system that will give us power over everybody? And
then they have them fight each other to see which one got the strongest, the fast. Oh, wow, this one's impressive. Let's see if it beats that one. And they make money all the way around. It's crazy.
Bernard Lietaer, who I've talked a little bit about in our interview, but he passed away a few years ago. But he was talking about how, whenever they have a revolution, they overthrow the system, but then they keep the same banking system. Right. That was in France, in Russia, and China. The Americans actually pulled away from that. And it's funny. I've been trying to read about colonial script, because Benjamin Franklin, said the greatest reason for the American Revolution was not taxation. It was because they outlawed colonial script. We couldn't print our own money anymore. We had to use the king script. And if you try to read about that, it's like really hard to find information.
Thomas Jefferson knew. Thomas Jefferson knew about the banking institution, and it was actually part of the squabble. Like Alexander Hamilton kept wanting to start the central bank.
And I think that Hamilton play, like they did that. They're trying to hype up Hamilton. Oh,
shit, dude.
So I'm like they're pushing an ideology by doing that.
Absolutely,
like, it's the central banks. I'm like, what the fuck? Why the fuck is Hamilton all of a sudden?
I know.
They're trying to dethrone. They're trying to dethrone because everybody has an admiration for
Jefferson.
Jeffersonian.
The propaganda coming out about Jefferson. Now everybody just, if you mention Jefferson, well, he owned slaves, so he did, and
he was a problem. I mean, they all were. They were all problems. But a lot of his ideas were actually really good.
That's just it. You can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. These guys weren't perfect.
They're dead. They're dead 200 years.
Right.
Like, no, we can take from it what's good and throw the rest of it out.
And that's what I mean. Like, instead of throwing out the whole idea of individual rights and individual liberty because the founding fathers didn't apply it equally to everyone, I think you got to realize, I mean, that's what I was trying to impart during our conversation, is that if you take the system and you realize that that these individual rights apply to everyone. The first and foremost, you cannot be a slave.
I believe
right?
I believe that principle for sure.
And,
Absolutely.
and if you believe in that in principle, then the whole system works. And then they say, well, they didn't include, African Americans, or they didn't include indigenous peoples or whatever. And it's like, so let's change that. They didn't include women. All right, let's change that. Everyone, here's the foundation of this system.
Right.
And I have tried, I came up with that idea of calling it stewardship rights, because I understand why people get frustrated. I mean, calling it property, you don't own, it automatically sounds like slavery, and it sounds like you're trying to control the nature, that you own the property. It does sound, but I think the system is actually the system that, like, the ideal of the common law system is actually really highly functional and could protect a lot of people and create a lot of power equality, right? A horizontal power structure in the world.
I think there's some good there. And
it was equally applied to everybody. I mean, of course, when you don't do that, then the people it doesn't apply to are going to be oppressed people. I mean,
for sure.
It's the nature of it.
Hang on one sec. Let me show you something. Oh, I was going to show you a book I just picked up about World War I and World War II in the banking system, but I can't.
Oh yeah,
it's on my shelf, but I can't see where it's at.
I've been checking out the Anthony Sutton stuff, the Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution, and it's just hilarious to read. It's exactly what you're saying. Like, right after the Bolshevik Revolution, he's talking about how these Wall Street guys are in there and they're starting a central bank, and the Wall Street guys are right there helping them set it up. I mean, it's just like, oh my God.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
I mean, have you heard about, like, what are the countries that didn't have a central bank? And it's like Syria and Cuba and North Korea, and Iran, and Libya and the first thing they did when they trashed Libya was put up a central bank. It's just like, oh God. I mean, that's what I mean about it being feudalism. The central banking system is literally the colonizing force. That's how they finance the empire. And that's how they've colonized the whole world. It's important for people to know. It's amazing how many really don't.
Okay. I don't know where the fuck that book is. Anyways, this one's good too. The Lost Science of Money, Zarlenga.
I heard you talking about that guy, and so in some of the previous stuff. I guess that interview with John.
You can't study monetary history without reading this book.
Right. Yeah, I should check it out.
This is like the historical this is like the most comprehensive history of money that's out there.
Right.
And in the book, he even says, like, at the beginning, the book is kind of expensive. It's like $80 or something. But he said he used a certain, that's funny. My book's signed to somebody else.
Yeah.
He used a special kind of paper that lasts a long time. Like, he paid extra because he has a whole thing in there about how they've been trying to erase monetary history.
Right.
And I believe how even just researching this book was really difficult because they've just been throwing misinformation and really doing a lot to, like, throw people off of understanding actual history of money. I
am starting to wonder, I mean, the deeper I get into this whole thing, where suddenly it starts to, I mean, I'm realizing that, like, the mainstream media is basically garbage disinformation. And so if it's been garbage disinformation for the last 150 years, people are writing history books based on these newspaper sources that's garbage disinformation, right?
Copy.
Yeah. And so what is the real history? I mean, do we have any, talk about a story that's like, I really do trip out about I have forever. I mean, I studied, a lot of, like, Greek philosophy and stuff in college and Greek mythology, because I wanted to understand this concept of mythology and how it worked and understanding the psychology behind it and whatnot. But, when I heard you talking about the story of money, it instantly kind of reminded me of this idea that, yeah, I mean, we all have, I mean, I've done a lot of thinking in the last 6 or 8 months with the technocracy coming on about the idea of scientism. I mean, people call me anti-science if I try to argue about vaccines or something. And I'm like, well, all I do is read peer-reviewed literature, about this stuff. So am I anti-science? I don't get it. And I started thinking about, well, what is scientism? Because there's something out there that people think is science that's not actually in the peer-reviewed literature,
Yeah.
And it's a belief system. So then it's a mythology. And you're right about, and I do participate in like a sweat lodge. I have some Lakota friends that I hang out with, and I try to learn as much as I can from them, and just the whole idea of like their way of knowledge and thinking about things, and what, and how different it is from the way I was raised and that kind of thing. And just really trying to get an understanding of like, what is it to have a story that you have in your mind about reality? And is the story, because we don't really know what reality is, the story is actually more important than, I mean, I think you made a great point about it. You have to have your feet on the ground, right? I mean, if your story takes you too far outside of the reality, but your story has a lot to do with how you interpret that reality too, and what you think is true and what's not true. And, it's really crazy. And this whole idea about money and property and all of this, I mean, it is part of people's story. And the story,
and I don't have
change.
I don't think we should have loyalty to that. Like, yeah, use it if it's useful, and don't use it if it's not useful.
Right.
But as we move through our life, what should be front and center should be our relationship to one another, and our relationship to ecology and the planet and other life on this planet, and also future generations. And I know that like indigenous cultures have a lot about 7 generations, and it's so sick to see like the World Economic Forum and some of these things actually co-opt that language, because I even heard that they're like,
I know, we
need to think about 7 generations. I'm like, these motherfuckers are like doing some heinous shit. Like, they don't 7. How about this generation?
Well, you gotta wonder if they even believe that. I mean, I think at least some of them do believe their own.
I think
bullshit,
a majority of them actually believe that. I think their own shit doesn't stink, and I think I think it works because of humanity's ability to delude themselves.
Right.
And it's made it a lot easier when you've got an income,
right.
Someone's paying you money that pays your salary and lets you buy food and lets you, so you look up to them like, well, thank you. You're automatically going to adopt whatever ideology.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's coming to a head. Like, I'm like, we don't have time for this bullshit anymore. This is it. This is it right now. Like, humanity is at a crossroads.
Yeah.
Like no joke.
Yeah.
And again, like the whole Allison, like, I know that there's efforts to try to create division even there. And like, I know Allison gets a little frustrated with people and like, just like will block them and they get all upset. I'm like, who gives a shit? So what? Allison blocked you. She's doing good work and you should still support her. Like, this isn't about you or me. Like, I've had other people, Ava blocked me for whatever fucking reason.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And I don't really care. Like, whatever. Like, I appreciate the stuff she does and that's fine. Like, I'm not going to turn this into some personal bullshit. Like, we have work to do and we can all work in our own little areas and whatever. Like, we need to focus on what really matters right now. And even like with our disagreements, that's why I'm glad we had this conversation, because like, hey, that's okay. We can disagree. That's okay. We can, I don't consider you guys, and the people within the crypto space enemies, even though I disagree and I will be adamant that I think that the Bitcoin is not a good thing to put your energy into, but I'm not going to tell anybody not to do that. I'm just going to share my views on it and say I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
And then go ahead.
Well, that's where I think it's important. Like, as soon as we kind of got into the conversation, you were like, well, I don't, this is just my opinion. I'm not going to tell you what to do. And then it was like, well, then we agree. As far as I'm going, I don't know what to do. I just do what I think is best for me based on my limited capacity to understand. Yeah.
We can learn from each other. Say, well, why do you disagree with that? Like, this is my frustration. Like, they've destroyed dialogue in America. Like, people literally cannot have a fucking conversation.
It's nowadays. Pretty amazing.
And I'm like, you look back, there was that show, which I can't stand him, but who is the conservative guy? He had a show called The Firing Line. It was on PBS like back in the 70s, and I think it started in the 60s.
Oh, William Buckley?
Buckley.
Yeah.
I can't stand him. He's such a smarmy motherfucker.
He's such
I hate
an
that
arrogant
guy.
prick, isn't he?
But
he was.
That show was fucking amazing. You can watch that show and you'd actually have intellectual, intelligent debate where people disagreed with one another. And yeah, sometimes they got a little randy or whatever, but
right.
You know what I mean? But like, you watch that and you're like, you would never fucking see this on television today. Like even on YouTube, like, you know, people have their channels and they're just going to have everybody that fucking agrees with them on.
Yeah.
And I'm like, hey, you know what? Like, that's not healthy. You're creating your own little thing. Like, have somebody on, you know, obviously you want to have someone that's going to be respectful and not be a dick.
Right.
But like, we need to have, you know, more cross-pollination of ideas.
One of the things that I've seen, and it started to come out on that thread with Allison or whatever. I mean, Allison wasn't really involved, and I'm not going to get in a fight with her exactly for what you're talking about. She does great work. I mean, whatever. But people start calling other people controlled opposition as soon as they have a disagreement. I mean, I did this show. It's up on my website. It was called the Roundtable Discussions, and I was working with this guy. And, you know, it was cool. I had some great conversations because he would do the work of producing them and get, you know, Judy Mikovits together with Stephanie Seneff or whatever. And I'm having these conversations with these people that he would put them together. And it was fun. But, you know, we'd start talking about different people in the scene, people that we might want to have on the show. And he'd be like, well, so-and-so is controlled opposition. And then I'd be like, well, what's your definition of controlled opposition? And I basically found out that anybody that really didn't answer, you know, an email from him or somebody that, you know, stopped communicating with him or somebody whose position he disagreed with, like all of a sudden there were like dozens and dozens of people that he wasn't going to talk to because he was sure that they're controlled opposition. And I was even trying to talk to him like, you think this person is working for some intelligence agency spreading disinformation? You know, I mean, what are you?
Well, and those people are out there, but
it was kind of nuts.
Yeah.
Unless you have working with him.
Yeah.
You know,
and those people there is controlled opposition out there, but you know, trying to identify those people is very difficult. It's also very dangerous, messy work because you run the risk of accusing people that aren't guilty. And so unless you have like if you have some damning proof, like I think actually some of the criticisms of looking at where money comes from, you know, challenging like that guy, Lucien or whatever, that's, you know, and who's been working with one of the people that was on the Greater Reset based on the merits. So like, hey, this guy's invested in this thing and there's legitimate, or even John Bush, there's legitimate criticisms to be had there. You don't have to go into controlled opposition, but you can just say, hey, you know, this thing that you're promoting is not healthy. And here's why I think it's not healthy. Yeah. And you can have a discussion about it. But
I mean, you know, what's interesting, like Allison was calling out John Bush and even Robert Kennedy, and like,
but her criticisms actually were based in they weren't just, she wasn't just randomly calling them out. She was saying no, they were actually invested in these.
They are no,
things,
I
and
do get it.
That's worth calling out. Actually,
right.
That's legit.
I agree with her for calling them out, but I'm not going to stop. Like, I mean, I'd still like to talk to John Bush on my podcast, right, about his health ideas. And I don't think he's necessarily controlled opposition. I just don't think he understands exactly the technocracy that's coming on. And he's been sort of fooled into thinking that it's more innocuous than it actually is. And also these people that are more wealthy, I mean, I don't know, they must be approached all the time. I mean, Robert Kennedy,
right.
You know, it's like they're just in a different scene and they probably don't understand. I mean, what Allison understands.
I like to give people the benefit of the doubt.
Maybe I'm naive about it, but I mean, I'd love to talk to Robert Kennedy, right? If he wants to do an interview with me.
Well, but I think that like, and I think there's a way that you could do it too. And I think sometimes like even Allison gets a little bit too aggressive with the way I'm like, just pull back a little bit. You can still present that information and do it in a way that might help facilitate, you know, people, because then it gets into this fight and you don't want it to be about that. You want it to be about like, hey, these are bad systems and this impact investing is bad. Like no one should be involved at all with impact investing. It's not a healthy thing. And Allison is 100% right to say, hey, you shouldn't be involved with this fund that's you know, that's involved with all this nefarious shit. Like that's just and I'd like to give people the benefit of the doubt that like they just don't know any better, whatever.
Yeah.
But we still need to be able to criticize each other and say, no, this is not not the best approach to this problem.
Yeah.
And like even Bill Gates, I've thought about this over the years. Like I've wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt. It's becoming much more difficult.
I've stopped doing that for Bill. Yeah, I don't give him the benefit of the doubt anymore.
At this point, I think he's just an evil motherfucker.
He's just,
But for many years, I was like, I'm going to just assume he wants to do the right thing. And there's a conflict between his desire to make money and his philanthropic, you can't, these are two conflicting things. Like you can't, want to get rich and become the most powerful rich person in the world and also want to save the world at the same time. Those two things just don't go together. Like you can't do both. Like, but for years I was giving him the benefit of the doubt, but now I'm like, fuck that guy.
Once people really started
and right.
Once people really started looking into his connection with the Event 201 and just exactly how the COVID thing, like James Corbett did a pretty solid couple series documentary about it or whatever. And I'm looking at that and I'm going, holy shit. This guy was literally invested in every single aspect of the rollout of this thing. I mean, from the media to the vaccines, to the COVID pass, to the food, to the, like every aspect on down the line. Like there's no way that he didn't just, he built this whole thing from the ground up with his billions of dollars.
Well, I don't think it's just him too. I think these people, even Elon Musk or whoever, I think these are like figureheads. I think that there are structures. Right. A lot of people go to like the Illuminati and all that shit. Like I don't even fucking delve into that shit.
You can't really prove that stuff.
But it happens behind the scenes. But I know it. I'm totally confident that exists. However that looks like. I don't even know.
Right.
Like, I'm not even going to go down that rabbit hole because you're never going to really know how that works. But
certainly you got to believe there's old money. There's old money behind all of this shit.
And there are
and those families don't come out and say, hey, look at me. They have their Bill Gates and their new money families to do that for them.
Right.
And
it's like someone that's coming up like an Elon Musk. They probably bring him in and say, hey, so this is the deal. We run this motherfucking show. Yeah. We'll let you do your thing, but you're going to join into our little jerk off committee and whatever.
And you're going to be the front man for a while and you're going to invest in the Neuralink shit or whatever with the money that we give you. And you're going to,
Right. Yeah, so I think that there are power structures that are way beyond what we even know. But I do believe that exists.
I've been going so far as to think, you were talking about having to change on a spiritual level. And I think that those guys, I don't know, again, you can't prove that it's the Illuminati or are they into black magic or whatever.
I don't even fuck with any of that shit.
You can't really prove any of it, but I do feel like they do have, whatever it is, this worship of transhumanism and technocracy. They truly want to replace humanity with machines. This is the end game for them, and that is not a spiritual path that I want to go down. For sure. So it is. I am feeling more and more that there is like this spiritual component, and there's kind of a spiritual battle going on, and we got to wake people up to the spiritual foundations of their humanity before it gets stolen from them by these weird transhumanist bastards.
Yeah. There's something weird. I don't get into what their cultist beliefs or whatever. To me, that's just a rabbit hole, like a distraction. Yeah. Like I think some of that's deliberate, like because then they can just dismiss you, like, oh, they're Satanists. They drink
it's a tough one.
And eat,
I did do a couple of interviews with like people that had claimed that they were, they were victims of the satanic abuse. I kind of went down that rabbit hole for a couple interviews, and I gotta say, the farther I went down it, the more it was like, these people believe that they've witnessed some pretty fucked up shit.
Well, it's always like eyewitness and just like even the UFO thing. Like I don't really spend time on the UFO thing. I'm like, maybe there's UFO, maybe there's not. Like I'm going to focus on like something that I can actually like sink my teeth into. I can show you how the monetary system works. All right. Like I can show you like, this is how money is created. It's how it enters the system. And this is all the effects of that. We don't even have to get into how the monetary system was created or, going into the history of that, which is fascinating. But, let's just like focus on what we can do. Cause then people like, you want to be pragmatic. You want to like, we need to like figure out a way to approach these things where we're not going to sit there and just argue about hearsay. Like, oh, this person saw this other person turn into a lizard. Like, you can't prove or disprove that. You just have someone's testimony. And not only that, like, what does that to do with the fact that the banking system is doing what it's doing? Like, and how can we come together and create something better? That's what we need to be fucking focusing on. So you there? Did I lose you?